I grew up in Little Italy at 247 Mulberry Street in Manhattan, of course. And I want to talk to you today about how it was growing up there during those times, because I go back way to 1938. And I lived at 247, which is noted for the fact that it was the building in which the Ravenite Social Club was housed. But before the Ravenite Social Club, it was called the Alto Knights. It was my grandfather's club. As a little boy, I worked in the club. It was a social club for members in the community. It was a great neighborhood, which I want to talk about also today, because it doesn't exist now the way it was. It's terribly changed. And people, I think, should know how it was back in the days when I was growing up. For example, as you'll see in the picture here, 247 Mulberry Street. You can't see it here, but I'll show you some other more open pictures. This was the Ravenite Social Club, or the Alto Knights previously. By the way, today, which is the year 2026, the Alto Knights was started in 1926, so it makes it 100 years old. And I don't know if there are many people like myself who are still around who can speak about this. However, when I grew up, I lived in apartment 10, second floor. It was a beautiful apartment. The building was a landmark building built in the 1890s, or really at the end of 1890. Probably we could say 1900. And the apartment which we moved into in 1938, my family that is, faced St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which is a landmark 250-year-old cathedral, and cemetery which surrounds it, as well as St. Patrick's School, which was around the corner from 247 Mulberry. And there was nothing open here. This was a garage. As you can see here, I don't think anybody really has seen this picture. But the beginning of my memoir, you can see it's the same picture, but this was the Ravenite Social Club, which is in Wikipedia, described to a T, and you're getting the picture from me as I saw it during those days, as I grew up there. Now, this picture, probably nobody knew that this was 247, but this was 249. I figured that out after my research some years ago, way back in the early 70s. And from the Ravenite Social Club at 247, there was the Oldsmobile garage at the time. At the end of the garage was a chicken market. And I worked in the chicken market as a young boy when I was 7, 6, 8. I worked for a very kind old man, not old at the time, but a big old man named Olivetti. And he took an interest in me and taught me how to kill chickens, sell chickens, pick eggs, do all those kinds of things that needed to be done in the chicken market. Clean the chickens, even take cash from the customers. He would send me, for example, at those days, in the 40s, to buy him a meatball sandwich around the corner at Houston Street, a block away, at a famous restaurant there was called Bellato's. And I'd come back and he'd give me a quarter, which was big those days, you know. And I made money working for him in the chicken market, which was on the corner. And it was an Oldsmobile garage, so you saw different kinds of cars like this those days. But In the evening when the chicken market closed down, my friends and I would play there was a stoop leading up to the chicken market. We'd play all kinds of games, spin tops, pitch coins, do things like this, these kinds of games. And as you can see, over here was the extension of Mulberry Street. This is Mulberry and Prince. And we could see way down to Houston Street. And you can see later on, not much later, but later on, the Oldsmobile garage was still there, but it was taken over by Ross Trucking. Ross Trucking eventually became the banana king for the city. They were kind of the black market, if you want, for the banana trade. And we played stickball there. There's a good friend of mine, Jimmy Contino, hitting a Spalding ball pretty far, almost a block, toward the Puck Building and over the Puck Building sometimes. And these were the kinds of players that, I played with on Mulberry Street. Just by coincidence, Agnello Della Croce lived across the street, really, from 247 at, I think it was 236 or 238. And much years later, in 1955, he was married in 54, but then he had a son in 55 named Buddy. And this is little Buddy at the time watching the stickball game on Mulberry Street, as well as some friends of mine who I knew, as even some potential mafiosa eventually in that crowd. So basically that's how the block was. The apartment faced St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which was a landmark, and cemetery. This is a quick picture of it. And this we could see from my window. This was the cemetery. It's extended past that, and it extended all the way to the next block, which was Mott Street, St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. From there, around the corner, across the street, and maybe 50 or 100 yards down the street was St. Patrick's School, which I attended. And it was a great school, taught by the Sisters of Charity, Mother Seton. So I attended classes there. Still remember every student's name in my class, which I put in my pre-memo here, or memoir. And I was a very good student, and since I lived across the street from the church, they recruited me early to be an altar boy. Not only that, I served many masses, and they had me ring the church steeple early in the morning because I could be in the church within 5 minutes, dressed and on the altar with the priest. Even eventually, during those years, way back, I guess in 1954, Neil Della Croce, I used to call him Bud, asked me to be the altar boy at his wedding. And I did. I knew his wife, Mary Riccardi. She lived across the street from me at 248. And we were kind of neighbors because we could see each other from each person's window on Mulberry Street. My mother's family lived at 250, which is right the next building there, because the even numbers, 247, and the odd numbers was one side of the block, and that was the south side, and the north side, the even numbers. So across from 247 would have been 248. 249, which was the garage, as you see, would have been 250. My mother's whole family lived there. There were 5 sisters and 3 brothers. and they could really see right across the 247. So we were very close-knit. So in the church, I served as the altar boy to Neil Della Croce and Mary Riccardi at the time. And eventually, when I was married in 1964, he attended my wedding, along with some other mafioso or potential mafioso friends of his. But don't get me wrong, I knew these people, but I really didn't associate with them to any degree. And at that time, they weren't as powerful as eventually they became. So that was how it was like early on. We had the Play Street where you saw. You had the church right across the way. You had the school right around the corner. And the block had everything you wanted. You not like today where wherever you live, you go into big supermarkets and plazas and parking cars. If I walked downstairs from apartment 247, there was a grocery store, there was a bread store, there was a fish store, there was a laundry, Chinese laundry, in fact. The neighborhood was only 5 blocks away from Chinatown, but there was a Chinese laundry right on Mulberry Street, right a few buildings down from my house. There was the garage, as you saw. So there was everything you wanted. Meat market, the chicken market. Really, it was very exciting living. We could play sports, we can go to school, we could attend church, we could do whatever we want. In those days, it was a pleasure to live down on Mulberry Street in those years. Today, it's very different, very teeming with tourists and shops and restaurants. It's not like what it used to be. So my purpose here really is to give you a flavor of how it was living downtown at 247 Mulberry Street, which eventually became the apartment, actually, where the FBI nabbed John Gotti in the late 80s. And my aunt still lived there. It was my aunt's apartment at the time, Nettie Sorelli, my mother's sister. And she happened to be away, of course, when the FBI, or when Gotti planted the bugs, I guess, when eventually got him caught. She was attending my cousin James in California, his house. So they knew that the house would be empty. But on the other hand, her husband was Michael Sorelli. Michael Sorelli was a consigliere and to Neil Della Croce. But Michael Sorelli also, I knew, was boyhood friends of my uncle. They lived at one time in the same building. I knew Della Croce's family, his sister, his brother, his son. He had a son, as did Della Croce, his son Frank. Both young men eventually didn't die very pleasant deaths, and Frank in his 30s in a boat accident, and Buddy, God knows how, many years later. But this was kind of the climate in which 247 was. But more than that, when I was there in the 40s, I worked in the cafe. It was called the Alto Nights. It probably looked more like this picture. Now I know that because there was a basement here. You can see the chains, and it's just next to the entrance to the doorway. And there was a basement here. My father was the janitor of the building in the 50s. So I knew what was down the cellar, the basement, where the people stored the tenants stored their belongings and things if they had them. And the other part was where they delivered coal, because in those days we had a coal fireplace to heat the houses. And I would help my father, with shoveling the coal, stoking the fire, and even cleaning the building, which was a tough job. So I knew every stairway, every hallway, the windows up to the roof, and all the roofs. And the building looked like this in 1984, the Ravenite Social Club, under Neil Della Croce. The facade was covered with red bricks once Gotti became the boss. This was in a picture taken from the New York City Department of Records, 1939 to 41. And just to give you an idea of the climate in which Mulberry Street existed in those days, and the structures. Later on, while still still living in Mulberry Street, I lived there from the 38 until 64 when I left to be married. And I was able to study. It's a 2.5-room apartment. I have 2 sisters. They all graduated St. Patrick's, and thereafter, still there in Mulberry Street, I attended at Cardinal Hayes High School in the Bronx, which was all boys high school. The other thing in the neighborhood, which still exists, but not the way it existed when I lived there, the 3 independent subway systems were there. Around the corner on Spring Street was the IRT. On Prince Street was the BMT. On Lafayette Street, which was the next block after Mulberry Street, was the Independent or 8th Avenue subway. So we can get anywhere we wanted. There was a bus system that ran on Lafayette Street. Not too far down, there was the Bowery. The Bowery had trolley cars. You can go up and downtown with the trolley car. Houston Street, which is 1 block to the north, had transportation east and west. Canal Street toward the south, east and west. So there was everything in that neighborhood. You couldn't want for more. And it was not like today. So I was able to study for my degrees there, and eventually when I left in 64, I was already a university professor and dean at Long Island University in downtown Brooklyn, which was a 15-minute ride away, where I attended, for my bachelor's and master's, and then NYU's Graduate School of Business, which was also 10 minutes by train, which was in Wall Street at the time. I also got my PhD there, and was able to, they hired me as a dean and professor as soon as I received a degree, or very shortly after that. So, kind of, that's how it was, but I went back to Mulberry Street after I left in 64 many times to see my aunt, and even after they bugged the apartment, and she lived until 206, and not a very happy life to, once they bugged that apartment, she had some issues, very depressed and kind of deteriorated physically after that point. Some of the mafioso people that I knew lived there, not that I associated with them, was well, you had Neil Della Croce, who was the underboss to Gambino and then the Gambino family. I saw Gambino one time when I was working in the cafe. And then really after that, in the 50s, came in with a little guy with a fedora on, with his head down, afraid anybody would see him. But that was my basic time I saw him. But Della Croce, as I say, he always didn't look that stern. Here's a picture of him at a party, and this is my uncle Michael Sorelli, who was a consigliere to Bud O'Neill, and he was my Aunt Nettie's husband. This is O'Neill Della Croce, who maybe in the 50s or even earlier, late 40s. And this is his brother Carmine Della Croce. They called him Chicago Jim. This is a better picture, I don't know if you can see it, of my uncle with Charlie West. Charlie West was another mafioso, but a very down-to-earth, sociable guy who befriended my father. In fact, they even socialized many times, took him on his boat and so forth. And this, I believe, was Joe the Cat. Joe the Cat was the guy that owned the buildings at the time. And this was another mafioso type, Mike Catalano, who lived across the street at 248. So those are about the only people that I recognized mafiosi and knew somewhat that lived there in the neighborhood or in the building. Now later on, Well, I was writing the first part of the the memoir, which hasn't been produced yet. This was in 2015, and they had already built a building, which was a condo building and a supermarket. Years in the some years before that blocked the whole view. This was still 247 apartment 10. So we didn't have any view anymore of directly of the St. Patrick's Church and cemetery, and the neighborhood was changing very much. Again, the cars, and the Ravenite Cafe was now a shoe store, as you see here. This is in 2015. Today, in 2026, where it's not much different, but it's a crazy men's store. The door is different from what it was in 2015, and the condo building is, I guess, well, the story with that is 247. The rental of the apartment when we were there was about $27 a month. Now this is from my memory. Of course, when my father was the janitor, we didn't pay any rent. When my aunt was living there up until 2006, when she passed away, in Eddie Sorelli, it was up to $220 So then this became when they bugged the apartment with Gotti, the building was sold, I think, in 1993 or thereabouts, in the 90s, for $1,300,000. And then in 2011, if I remember correctly, it was sold for $11 million. It is a rental apartment, revised somewhat inside, but not that drastically, as you see. The facade is still the same. You know, the landmark building, the apartments. Dressed up, they were renovated inside. So maybe that 2.5-room apartment that we lived in is probably renting for over $5,000 these days. And that's, I guess, the way of the world, but not the way it used to be. I also want to mention, across the street was my mother's family. If 247 is here, we directly looked at it. Of course, when the garage was there, they overlooked the garage. Now they overlook the condo building. But this was their apartment, so they had direct views, as well as over here, there was St. Patrick's Cemetery and church, and the Mulberry Street where we played stickball. And there were candy stores and bakery next door, and you name it. But this was kind of a landmark building too. But 247, the interesting thing I remember, 247, where I lived, was pretty much the modern building in those days. There was it had, as I said, it was 2.5 rooms, okay? As you walked in, it was a kitchen where you could cook and eat. There was a bedroom to the left and a bathroom. The bathroom had shower, tub, all the conveniences that you might expect. And I'll show you what I'm talking about with the contrast. Across the street in 250, which is a larger building, had more families, the toilets were in the hall. And it was like in The Godfather when he planted the gun on the top of the toilet bowl. Michael Corleone to shoot the inspector was Sterling Hayden at the time in the movie. That's how it was. Their toilets were in the hallway. And there were 4 families, four families on the floor. So, but we had the conveniences in 247. It was a much better building, and as I say, my father kept it always in mint condition. I used to even climb the roofs. I knew all the things about the roofs, from building to building. Go see friends from that type. All kinds of stories I could tell you, but right now I think I'll just break.